Welcome again. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another of our interfaith conversations. Today we're not so much doing a lecture, but we're reverting back to our program called Talking God. And our topic today is going to be generation to generation. Since there are 15 years between each of us, we thought it might be interesting to record the religious and spiritual journeys of the three of us. And you might ask, well, what has that got to do with interfaith? Well, I would say that when you are involved in an interfaith dialogue, conversation, I think one of the primary goals is to get to know your dialogue partner as best you can. And so sharing the ins and outs of spiritual development, spiritual growth is important. And the other thing that is important about dialogue, when you're involved in dialogue, there's always the chance that you may be wrong in your position. And there has to be an openness to change. And I would say the better you know your partner, the less threatening that change may be. And all for the better in terms of the growth of the dialogue itself. So that's the way we're going to focus on today. And let me introduce you to a new member to this particular venue, Father Roy Tverdik, who is one of the founding members of Project Genesis. And of course, you all know Rabbi Gadi, and I'm Don Russo. And so let me just turn it over for a moment to Rabbi Gadi before we begin. And I know he has a couple of things to say about generation to generation.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a generation to generation in Judaism is such an important concept, if not the cornerstone, really, for our faith. There's exactly 15 years. I'm turning 50 today. Well, we're celebrating today, but our birthdays, mine is going to be in 2 days, and Father Roy's in 3 days, and
they're pushing me to be 80. But my birthday is not until.
Has to fit the algorithm.
It's amazing. I'm turning 50, Father Roy 65, and Dr. Don Russo 80. So we thought it would be amazing to look at these three generations and see what the development. So the three generations actually in Judaism is not just the cornerstone as a metaphor. It literally is. It's spelled out a cornerstone. So the word stone in Hebrew is even. There are 3 letters, and they're an acronym of Av, Ben, Neched. Even, so it's father, son, grandson, or grandmother, or mother. Well, it doesn't work like that because it's, no, Ima, no, God, yes, it works with the women too, good, the feminine. So, mother, daughter, and granddaughter. So it's the 3 generations that literally we say this is the cornerstone of everything, the transmission of the tradition and so forth. So I'm glad to be here with 2 Catholics on 2 sides. So today I'm not just between 2 ferns, I'm between 2 Catholics. And to hear their different perspectives. If we could have recorded yesterday, it was Shabbat, we couldn't record it, but our preparation conversations for these sessions are amazing. So hopefully we can replicate it here today. So without further ado, I think we let Father Roy maybe start with his spiritual journey. We're starting with you, right? If you want to say a couple words.
I'll just say, well, hello, and glad to be here again and to be part of this program. The Talking God was certainly a nice beginning that we did probably a year ago now. So it's the idea of dialogue and coming together is really where the Spirit can really move and manifest itself. So we're glad to be able to, I'm glad to be able to be here today. So.
I think what we decided to do, rather than take almost 20 minutes apiece, to start with kind of a 5-minute introduction to where we're coming from, and then we'll open up more or less to a conversation among the three of us. So I'm going to start, and the way I'm going to start is not so much chronologically, but on the level of principle and foundation where I am now, and where I've come from, but in principle and in theory. So first of all, we're talking about spiritual growth and one's spirituality. And I would start with a definition of spirituality, which kind of sums it up. It's not a total explanation of spirituality, but it focuses on what I think is important. And there was a spiritual writer who said that spirituality is what you do with your fire. And what he was referring to was the fire that we receive as a gift from the Spirit, using the imagery of Pentecost and the tongues of fire and the Spirit pretty much breathing that enthusiasm and fire into each of us. So spirituality is what you do with that fire, with that gift of the Spirit. So to kind of sum up where I've been and where I am now, this is the basic idea. I've gone from a religion of answers to a spirituality of questions. The interfaith element in my life, which I've been involved in since 1969, has been a great help to my growth. But at this point in my life, I'd rather have questions without answers than answers that cannot be questioned. So for me, it's more important to pay attention to the question than whether you agree with my conclusions or not. I can honestly say that throughout the progress of my growth, I've grown in understanding of my faith. And I've come to the conclusion, originally I really thought that faith, the opposite of faith, was doubt. But now I really believe that doubt and faith are two sides of the same coin, because I believe that the opposite of faith is certainty. And I think in so many ways, religious people want certainty and yet want to call themselves people of faith. And there seems to be an antagonism between those two comments. So I'll get into that a little bit later. And when I was studying in Rome, we had a very, very deeply spiritual priest, that's a spiritual director. And towards the end of my 4-year stay in Rome, I asked him, in terms of his experience, what is the will of God for me? And the answer that he gave me is, I will not forget as long as I live. He said, God's will for you, Donald, is your prudent Christian decision. Your prudent Christian decision. Now, each of those obviously elements have a lot packed into them, but that seems to be, that was a great impetus for me in terms of my growth. Now, I'll go into explain the chronology of my growth later on, but let me pass on to Roy or Gadi.
Well, I would say I come from a different perspective, coming out of, I was raised Catholic. We went to Mass. That's about it. CCD really was the only contact I had. So it wasn't a big, kind of theological and searching for truths and all the rest. I just was born Catholic. We went to church. That's what we did. And then we fell out of church, exactly. And we bought a farm, and we used to go on weekends up to the farm all the time. And it wasn't a big decision by the family, like, okay, we don't do God anymore. We just got busy. And exactly at the time when Vatican II was being implemented, so from around 1967 to about 1974, I missed all that stuff when I hear people talk about the changes in the church. So I didn't hear the drama, I didn't hear the explanations. I just came back finally, in the senior year of high school, and basically asked what happened. One of my first masses was at St. Gerard's in the Fox Theater. So I'd never done something like that. Wow, in the Fox Theater, and we're having church, and okay, kind of dealt with that. And then another day was a nice day at the outside, so I guess they had Mass on the ball field on the property of St. Gerard's. So I'd never seen that. Whoa, what's this mean? So I began to ask questions like, what happened to the tradition, and what's being passed on? I'm not seeing what I recognized maybe as a small child, and now I'm coming to this whole new reality of church. So, and shortly thereafter, I found myself in a charismatic prayer meeting, and then charismatic masses, and all this. Wow, certainly not traditional Catholicism. It was hands waving and hallelujahs and people falling out in the spirit and all this kind of good stuff. And so I was just asking lots of questions, and I wanted to have answers. I wanted to see why and how and where is this going? What does this mean? So I came back into the church after Vatican II, and I could appreciate some of the newness of it, but then was struck by some of the uncertainties. Like, what does this mean now? What are these practices? Why did things change? And I wasn't, at that point, wasn't getting answers right the first year. Once I got into the seminary, I felt called to go into the seminary, found some answers, some questions, more questions. And then I did leave the seminary for a while and went for about 8 years working. But still felt the call, a deep call to service and sacramental ministry. I had taken a job and training at Children's Hospital as a chaplain, and I found myself always, I actually did Hindu and Buddhist and Protestant funerals for my kids. These are my kids, But then I couldn't do it for the Catholic kids. And I thought, wow, I'd really like to do the whole thing here, and be able to minister. So that was kind of a call, and searching out what God was calling me to. So I've always been attracted, certainly, to ecumenical situations and interfaith, especially Judaism, trying to understand the uniqueness of it. So I'm glad I have this, not a fear, and I'm happy for that, not a fear of searching into other faiths and what's going on in this world of religion as we experience it. So I am concerned, though, and we all share at all of our churches and the synagogue, I know, that what is being passed on, and is it being accepted or understood by the young people? So I was just at Mass today at St. Agnes, did the 3 Masses. If you add 20 years, 30 years to everybody in the church except a few, not a lot of us are going to be there in 20, 30 years. So that's a real question for all of our faiths, what is being passed on and how is it being received? And so that's a question that certainly is in my heart.
Wow. Definitely this is the main question, what's going to be and where it's going and what are we doing right or what are we doing wrong right now? Just to kind of recap my journey, I grew up as a kind of traditional, but we were kind of secular at home. But when I moved to New York, I started studying at Yeshiva University, and little by little, I understood why my ancestors kept their Judaism and were willing to die for it and fought for it. So I became observant. But for me, the journey really is understanding that God is in search of man. You know, man is in search of God. Always we think that we're searching for God, but I realized that God was also searching for me. I just had too many coincidences in life. And then a good friend of mine said, you know, God's coincidences are God's way of staying anonymous. And this was my story, because I was not looking for this. I was going the other way. I was Jonah, going the other way. And every time I was running away, somehow God turned it that I found myself not just in the middle of things, but seriously involved. So when I came to Greenport finally, after going through all this, quitting my job in the corporate world and going to rabbinical school because of our interfaith program here, I realized this is so important. And Father used to say always, he was in real estate, and he said, I used to sell real estate on earth, now I sell real estate in heaven. And I felt like, you know, exactly what he said. He said, you know, there are plenty of realtors in this world, you know, but I think we need another good priest. And I would agree, because actually I'm a product, and this is the funny and interesting thing about this whole thing. I'm a product of all the development, the religious developments in the world, not just particularly Judaism. And I realize it now. First of all, I'll start with the latest, the one that happened the closest, is that I became a rabbi because of Father Roy, and then Don joined us, and so that's first, I would say, that a priest influenced me to realize that it's so important to work in the religious arena. So that was one big thing. Interfaith conversations are so important also because a lot of times you see that you have commonalities, and a lot of them. And what makes your uniqueness more unique. And that's why, for me, that was the decision to become a rabbi, because I realized how unique I was actually through studying with Christians. Because we agreed on, 90%, but the 10% that we didn't agree on, I realized, hey, wait a minute, I believe in, that's really who I am. I'm in that 10% that we do not agree on. That makes me not just a human being, but a Jewish human being. Finally, I want to say that the religious journey for me, coming to New York, for example, and not knowing anything about what happened in the Second Vatican Council and how Judaism and Christianity made peace at a certain point, and I was oblivious to all that. But today I understand that the only reason we're actually sitting here together and been very fruitful in our work is because the generations that preceded us helped us now to be here. So our goal, and I speak for at least, of course, I think our mutual goal is to then see what we can do now for the next generation, how we can bring the universality of religion, but also the uniqueness. And really, this is what my journey brought me to.
To kind of begin the conversation for myself, I'm basically the only one of the three of us that was pre-Vatican II, Vatican II, and now post-Vatican II. So I grew up in a very, very traditional Catholic family, supported by a Catholic culture, and so on and so forth. we had all of the answers. Our spirituality, which we didn't call spirituality, was the performance of pious actions, saying certain prayers, attending certain liturgical functions, and so on and so forth. And basically, the morality was a morality of kind of a heads-down morality. In other words, my life was what I would be doing, and what I thought I was being asked to do is to kind of keep my head down so I don't trip on the cracks in the sidewalks, which represent sin. So the more important thing would be to avoid sin rather than to do something positive. That came later on. I went to the seminary, and when I entered the seminary in 1962, and Vatican Council II had just begun. And there was an enthusiasm. I caught kind of the enthusiasm of the upperclassmen as they began to talk about and reflect on what was going on in the church now. As you've heard, Pope John the 23rd called the council to open up the windows for aggiornamento, the updating of the church. So I kind of caught that enthusiasm, and the next thing I know, 2 years later, I'm sent to Rome, and my first 2 years in Rome were during the last 2 years of the Vatican Council. There is no way I can explain to anyone what the atmosphere was during that council. All I can say right now, with everything that was going on, there was a tangible sense of the Spirit working in the church. And it was contagious. And so, also, now studying in Rome, I began to understand what it meant by the universality of the church, because I was studying with students from all over the world. The East, the West, South America, Africa, and so on and so forth. And you couldn't help between classes and going out for a beer or a glass of wine, you couldn't help but begin conversations, which is an opening experience, which I believe is what the Spirit wants of us, a creative spirit to open up. Those were very, very exciting days. So when I came back from Rome, I became involved in ecumenical and interfaith education as an educator in 1969. I did my graduate work for a doctorate at NYU, which in itself was a very ecumenical interfaith situation. And what I would say is that what was important to me in these dialogues was the people who were living out their faith rather than the ideology that they represented. I mean, Pope Francis has a great statement that I think rings true, that reality is more important than ideas. So when you're dealing with people on a level of sharing experiences, once you get to know the people, the ideology is secondary. Right? So that really helped me too. So then I taught for 35 years. I finally retired. And as I retired, I was invited to go on an 8-day silent retreat. Now, I was 62 years old at the time. And it was at that time, at the age of 62, that I can honestly say that I had my spiritually wow moment. And when I use the word wow, to me, that word means without words. Something you cannot totally understand, something I didn't totally understand, but that opened my eyes. It was 8 days of silence, and in that 8 days, I felt I went through a transformation and a conversion And that was kind of the beginning of the next step in my life. So I'm going to stop there. And
Well, we're going to have a conversation, but I think with reacting to Don, first of all, I went on my first silent retreat because of Don. And it was an amazing experience for me. Well, I would say it was probably the most significant experience I could. It was 8 days, and then I needed another week just to recover from that silent retreat because everything surfaces, and I feel like it's like soup, when it boils, and then you kind of have to clear the top. So that's the experience I had. It's the idea of religious versus spirituality is very important. I think it's where, with this generation and where we're going with this, I think we see it in Judaism, I think we see it in Christianity, is that the building, the house of worship is expanding too. It's beyond its walls. It used to be that you have to be in one place. And actually, just yesterday in synagogue, we read Moses' directive to the people of Israel that when they enter the land, from the book of Deuteronomy, when they enter the land, eventually God will choose a place to rest his ark. And from that point, you should only worship there. It means that you cannot slaughter animals in your home, and unless they're blemished, and so you kind of eat it. But ceremonially, religiously, you cannot do it in your house. And I think it served a very important purpose all these millennia, because people needed the organization for their faith. I totally understand that, of course, their body and spirit. Even the spirit that comes from heaven needs to be housed somewhere on earth. So it needs an address. But, of course, Jewish history showed that we've abused that, and the temple in Jerusalem became very political, right? And they had to move beyond it. But the organization around the spirituality is so important to define, just as much as the spirituality itself. So I always have this, kind of joke that people come to me a lot and say, Rabbi, I like you a lot. I'm very spiritual, but I don't do organized religion. And I say back, don't worry, sir, madam, we're not that organized. And I think that's the problem too. Because we've organized now in a different way that really needs to, instead of bringing the people in, it needs to reflect out. And I will say one thing about the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple. Originally, when it was built, it had the same idea, the same function. The windows, according to the Talmud, the windows in that building actually faced out. And what I mean is, how if you travel through Europe and the Middle East, and you've seen these ancient places that they had to defend themselves. So the windows were just a crack, right? But the opening was inside. The expansion of the window was towards the inside. But Solomon's temple, the crack was on the inside and the expansion went out, which means that the light comes from the ark, the building, but it needs to expand out. So I think interfaith conversation is also part of that idea of spirituality always has to expand. Just like knowledge and light and fire, it all expands. So since we live in what I found out in a theological world, when you are secular, you think, okay, I go to the grocery store and I do things, and it's physical, and you get married and you have children, but it's all, when you really look at it, it's theological. So the universe expands, right? According to science, we know the universe expands, and we now see all these new images from the new telescope. So it's incredible how we now, where we are, we all expanded somehow. And I think this is what really the point is, to expand through interfaith, through your own faith, intrafaith, but really that's the direction.
I would, jumping off, but both shared about this retreat experience. I would like to certainly talk a little bit about that. That is so essential, has been so essential for my journey, and obviously for the other two as well. You can't give what you don't have. And it really is on retreat, and now I'm going to add pilgrimage, okay, as another avenue that I think all seekers, religious people need to do, somehow, some way. Yes, God has an address, we have a location, and we have a church or a synagogue or a place where we normally go. But if that's only your experience of God at that location, at that address, and you've never found God outside those walls, that's a deficit. That's a real deficit. And so when this idea of pilgrimage coming from Judaism, 3 times a year, folks would make their way to Jerusalem from wherever they were. And I've led lots of different pilgrimages, walking pilgrimages and biking pilgrimages, and then bus pilgrimages, and going on a journey, and being open to how God will reveal Himself in the people. And if you're really attentive, as you become more sensitive, even in the weather, even in the breeze, even in the moment, even the music you might hear someplace else, the scripture that you're pondering, the memories that surface as you go through either a retreat or a pilgrimage experience, really does expand your horizons. And I receive such grace, we call it, insight, inspiration, connection, that now I know God's real. And I can share some of that experience. I could lead you into it, perhaps, in some ways, and speak about it and share it. But ultimately, it's got to be your journey then, too. I can't take that journey for you. So to do retreats, to do all these experiences that all the different faiths have, do it. I just strongly urge, make a sacrifice of time and treasure. Sometimes it is a little expensive to do some of these things. But, so many of us are, the secular world, okay, I need a vacation, I need a break, I need this. There's nothing more rejuvenating than a pilgrimage or a retreat. And if that's what your goal is on vacation, people need a vacation from their vacation, usually. And so they've made this time and used this time. Okay, I like to go on vacation too, and do some things. But for me, this idea of pilgrimage is part of my life at this point now. So to constantly learn, constantly seek, constantly meet new people, new situations, and then also touching base with these ancient sites that were so significant biblically or in church history, these incredible places where people have met God and speak about this reality in this place. So I've been very blessed and very privileged to lead people, and for me to go as a seeker as well.
Just to reply to just a comment on the words you said about coming to
Microphone.
If your only experience is really in the building, it's really not achieving its goal. And it reminded me of what Rabbi Joshua Heschel wrote. I think it was in the context of Shabbat, that people, and he wrote it in the 60s, that people at this point expect, when they come to synagogue, they expect not to be transformed. They expect to just come and whatever the service is and go home and just kind of check, okay, I've been to synagogue, I've been to church, but I have not been transformed. And I think that's exactly the point, is the expansion of the light is to teach the people who come that there's a conversation with God and you need to plug into it. And you'll have your own conversation. It's not my conversation. You're going to have a conversation. But you have to somehow start it. And I mean, for me, that was, as I said, it was the most significant when I realized, hey, wait a minute, there's a conversation here. It can't be that what I just experienced and what just happened before were a coincidence. And I think for me, that's my main mission in my congregation today, is to show that there's an ongoing conversation with God. And one of the things that we always say, it's interesting that even though the Bible has been already closed or sealed, we still live in biblical times. And that conversation never ends.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up too what Gadi was saying about institution and the move outward and trying to bring experiences, our own experiences of God and church and faith to others. We've run into the phenomenon today of people saying that they are spiritual but not religious. And I think sometimes, at least initially I did too, we old-timers are saying, you can't do it. I've gotten to a point now where I've said, we better do it, because if we're going to touch the lives of a younger generation, we as people who are involved in dialogue and interfaith must go out and evangelize, to use a word, and to take advantage of the spirituality of these young people. Because what I've come to believe is when they talk about they're not religious, they do not belong to or want to belong to the institutionalized church. And
why is that, do you think?
Because it doesn't feed them.
Why?
I think it, at least in some experiences, the institutional church represents doctrine, one way of doing things, proclaiming that it has all of the answers, and the generation today is a questioning generation.
Right.
So what I see too about institutionalized religion, and which I've come to relatively recently, is that the institution, and I don't care whether it's the synagogue, Roman Catholicism, or any other branch of Christianity or whatever, the institution and belonging to an institution is the choice of the individual, because it sees in that institution ways to bring about what they feel spiritually. So it becomes almost a support group, that I choose to be a Roman Catholic because in the midst of being Roman Catholic, its history, its imagination, its spirituality, those things will better help me to be a Christian. And what I see today in the world, especially here in the United States, that word Christian, to me, has been totally bastardized. All right? And so what I would prefer now is to, and when you're talking to people who say that they're spiritual, I would say to them, if you consider yourself a Christian, it's being Christ-like that is more important than being called a Christian, especially the way it's being interpreted today. The telltale sign is being Christ-like in your actions and in your ways of being. And so, to me, that is what the institutional church is going to help these people with. But it has to be a personal choice. Many of us were baptized into a church. For many people, they never make a conscious choice to belong to that particular church. So I think in the development of my own understanding of spirituality, that's become a very, very important element in terms of what my ministry is branching out.
I have to say, we teach about, the Bible tells us that in the days, it doesn't say messianic days, but it says days to come, the generation that will eventually come, it said that they will tell their parents. It's hard to translate, but it means that they will not be satisfied with simple answers, that they will be an inquisitive and questioning generation. And I think that the three generations that we represent are these three stages in the development, because as you were saying about your generation, it was more important to avoid sin than to do good. You know, and I understand, I know you're that generation. It was very important to kind of walk in the trail, not to venture out too much. I think Father Roy belongs to the next generation that at least, you know, definitely a product of the 60s, or, you know, it's you want to do good in the world, the 70s, for sure. My generation, I'm first generation Sabra, as we say, after 2,000 years of diaspora. And my generation, for sure, is that generation that we questioned everything. And we were able to tell our parents they were wrong, or back and forth, and almost like we were siblings, all siblings in one house, in one household. So, and the younger generation, forget about it. They don't take anything for granted, and they question everything. At least my generation took some things for granted. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. But this generation, even the frequency that they change jobs is amazing to me. And good jobs, great places. And they're searching so fast that I think this is really what we need to do for them. And this is what I see as my mission, is beyond, of course, seeing that God is in search of you too, and God is faster than you. So it doesn't matter how fast you change, believe me, God will be there too. That's one thing. But the second thing is, I think the other side of this coin, the same coin, is to create stability for them. They may say, oh, you know what, let's break all the institutions, let's get rid of everything. No. I agree that we have to question everything all the time, always refresh, always. But there's orthodoxy in this world that I think should definitely is the skeleton. And this is what we agree on. I think that's really where they need that too. They can question everything, but they have to know that there is something stable in this world. And if we all agree on it, it'll help them tremendously.
One of the things I learned in this Seder that we do every year, so it's a model Seder, we call it. So it's not on Passover night, but we do it soup to nuts, the whole thing we do. And so led by Rabbi Gadi, and then we do Christian commentary. And one fascinating thing I always think about is the four children, the image of the four children.
Exactly.
And that also could be understood as the four generations of handing on the story. And I couldn't explain it, maybe you have to go into it, all the details there, but the first generation, the elders at the table, and that's the whole passing on of the tradition of the story, what happened at the Exodus, and the question comes, why is this night different? What you know, and when I tell the story or preach about the Passover, the question is, well, tonight is the night that we left Egypt. And the kid sits there and looks at his father and says, but we live in Bensonhurst. What do you mean Egypt? We're here. What are we talking about? So there's something going on there that captures that past experience and brings it forward. So that the transmission of the tradition of the story gets passed to the next generation. But can you explain those 4 generations again?
Father is referring to the 4 generations in the Seder night. The first one is called wise. The second is wicked. The third one is simple. And the fourth one is the one that does not know how to ask. So we equated one of the interpretations of 4 generations. The first one is still smart. It's still they have knowledge of the tradition. They just don't want to necessarily continue to follow it, but they know it. Let's say Italian immigrants coming to America. The first generation still speaks Italian, still the food and everything. The second generation is questioning it in a way like, this was for you. We have other foods here. The third generation is neither here nor there because it just was not educated from their parent, the second generation. And that results, the fourth generation that does not know how to ask at all, they're lacking the vocabulary of even that conversation.
Right, so that's where I think, some folks of younger kids are really struggling because they don't have a vocabulary, they don't know how to ask. And so this is where I think we'll do a lot of work in the future as we go. If you want to learn, here we are. Here we are. Come and see.
Yeah. But the other part of that, it says, if the fourth child, it's your obligation to open up to them because they don't know how to ask. So you have to engage in the conversation. I think it kind of ties together everything we're saying that you have to come out of the building. You have to reflect out.
Yeah, as I can go back to my experience as a teacher, and the question would always come up, what is an educated person? And I think many people think an educated person is the one who possesses a whole lot of information, a whole lot of facts. And I said to him, no, because you can sit at a computer and assimilate all of those facts more than you can in the classroom. An educated person is one who is able to ask the good questions. Right? And I think this is what we're really talking about here. That if we as teachers, which is also included everybody who is watching, if we are the good teachers, we are to assist in helping people, since they're questioning anyway. What are the good questions? What are the meaningful questions? But in terms of my own life right now, getting older, I'm aging, or as some writers would say, I'm ripening. But now my spiritual growth and my spiritual focus has to be on aging and dying. Not that I'm being morbid about this, but there's a factual element that my soul somehow doesn't age the same way that my body does. My body is falling apart, basically. Okay. But what I would expect now is that my soul will mature and become more textured. There's a writer by the name of James Hillman who has a great line. It says, in this context, he says, the best wines have to be aged in cracked old barrels. And I think that that's, in a certain sense, in my growth, this is where I am right now. That my spirituality has to begin to age and mellow with all of that means in terms of my ministry. I'm being initiated into another way of life as I get older. And what that means for me is that I've lost certitude about certain ideas of God. Okay? I've lost certitude about certain ideas of God because I've realized that the box that I have built to contain God during my life is not big enough. So as you know, I must give thanks to all of those with whom I communicate and dialogue with now, and I pray that in my own old age that the Lord will give me the strength to slowly move away from all of those certitudes so I can be opened up more and more for God to surprise me. You know, because again, as was said, we're not chasing God. God is chasing us. It's that whole image of the hound of heaven. And, you know, I've got to learn in my spirituality to basically slow down and stop so that God can catch up, even though he's always present. But somehow, in my own growth, I've always wanted to control God. And now I realize the older I get, it's not going to happen. And I think it's about time that God catches up with me. So that's kind of my wish in my own spiritual development as I get older, that hopefully I will age like a good wine instead of a bottle of milk. So.
Wow. This explains your oaky smell. I would add to that that when you're talking about that in your spirituality now, you're looking towards the
harvest.
The harvest. Okay, I don't want to, you know.
The banquet. The banquet.
But you know, for me, actually coming to Greenport, I didn't know coming from the city and what the makeup necessarily of the population here, and it turned out they were all much older than me. And after 10 years, I think we're at the point where we're starting a Hebrew school now for kids. So it took a whole decade basically to say, okay, even though we're concentrating on also death and dying and all that, we need to prepare for the next generation. And you know, that message is within that is always where life is. And I think while you're doing that, also you're supporting this that supports everything else. So it's amazing how these generations are really intertwined and we influence each other so much that we don't even realize.
Very good. Well, it's almost done, I think.
Anybody have any questions?
Any questions? Yeah, I'd like to hear maybe if there's any question.
No. Hopefully we gave you something to think about. Hopefully we've let you get to know us a little bit better and what we're about in this interfaith dialogue that we continue with the activities that we have, the lectures, the Talking God, the pilgrimages, and we hope that you'll continue to follow us. And our next get-together will be here on September 11th.
We'll each share our very profound experience during 9/11 and how it affected us also religiously. So we were all right there for that experience. So and all influenced significantly. So that would be next time. But do you want to also say something about the pilgrimage, your pilgrimages and mine?
Well, we're doing I'm doing two types of pilgrimage. Of course, our main experience is the pilgrimage, the Jewish Christian pilgrimage. It'll take place February 5th next year, 2023. And so we'll invite you to come to consider joining us for that pilgrimage. we have a Christian day and a Jewish day. We kind of flip back and forth. So we go to both places. So that's one thing. Rabbi Gadi's taking a particularly Jewish group in November, and I'm taking a group in September, a Christian group, Catholic group. And so we're looking at these maybe smaller experiences. It seems sometimes it might be hard to get a big crowd together to do it with a big group, but these small experiences are really quite nice. So there's other pilgrimages I do to Ireland. I'm going to be going to Ireland, and then hopefully to Spain, Portugal, and Fatima, and whatever. That's it for now.
I want to add last thing. You know, a human being in Genesis, it says a human being is like the tree of the field. And the way we look at it, how are we resembling trees? The trees can't move, we move, we speak, they don't speak. What's the connection? So, two things about it. One, we share with trees roots, trunk, and branches or fruit, all that. So in this sense, it's the generation that I think the reason I can bring out fruit, produce fruit, is because I nurtured from the previous generations. And when we come to Project Genesis, of course, my experiences with the previous generations can propel me forward. They say about the sequoia trees, I don't know if you know that the redwood, the sequoia, I guess they're pretty much, it's the same. Yeah, it's the red. The sequoia trees, you know, their roots don't go very far down, and yet they're 2,000 years old, and they are the tallest trees. So how do they survive like that? And they showed that actually the reason they survive that way is because they're all connected underneath. All the roots actually form one big platform. So I think on both ends, whether the roots go down or whether they're spreading within the community, but we all need roots. And without those roots, the next generations cannot develop. And that's also the imagery for what we've been talking about today. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming and sharing this experience. Thank you.